High above a Europe torn apart by war, the sky itself became a battlefield. By the early 1940s, clouds were no longer just weather, they were hiding places for fighter planes, death traps for pilots, and the stage for a ruthless struggle between empires. Every mission meant facing not only enemy guns, but also the terrifying possibility of never seeing the ground again. In this deadly arena, survival was never guaranteed, and only the most disciplined and fearless would endure. Among the countless young men sent into the air, one would rise far beyond the rest. James Edgar, Johnnie Johnson did not begin his journey as a natural-born hero. In fact, his path to becoming a fighter pilot was filled with setbacks, rejection, and physical pain. Long before he ever faced German aircraft, he had to fight his own system just to be allowed to fly. Yet it was this struggle that shaped him into something rare, a pilot who combined determination with quiet precision, and courage with careful control. At the same time, the skies were being transformed by new and terrifying machines. German fighters such as the Focke-Wulf FW-190 were faster, more heavily armed, and deadlier than anything many Allied pilots had faced before. These aircraft did not just challenge the Royal Air Force, they dominated it. At least for a time. Every encounter with them became a test of nerve, skill, and instinct, and many pilots never returned from those meetings. It was into this brutal environment that Johnnie Johnson flew, carrying not only his own hopes, but the fate of those who would follow him. He was not driven by a desire for fame or glory. What set him apart was something far more dangerous and far more powerful, a refusal to be defeated. In the chaos of swirling contrails, exploding shells, and burning wreckage, Johnson would begin to prove that even in a sky ruled by fear, one man could bend the balance of war. This is not just the story of a pilot. It is the story of how a single figure rose through adversity to become a legend of the air, one who would challenge the strongest enemy fighters and leave an indelible mark on the history of aerial warfare. Johnnie Johnson's journey toward the cockpit was shaped more by persistence than by privilege. Long before he ever faced enemy fighters, he had to fight for the right to fly at all. In a society still bound by rigid class structures, the Royal Air Force did not easily accept men from ordinary backgrounds. Despite his intelligence and passion for aviation, Johnson was initially turned away. Then came another blow. A rugby accident left him with a damaged shoulder that made flying painful and unstable. For most, this would have ended any hope of becoming a pilot. For Johnson, it became a challenge he refused to surrender to. When the pressure of war forced the raft to expand, Johnson finally gained entry into flight training. But his injured shoulder remained a constant threat. During one training flight, the weakness caused him to lose control and crash, nearly ending his career before it began. Doctors warned him that his body might never withstand the strain of combat flying. Instead of quitting, Johnson found his own solution. He tightly strapped his shoulder in place before each mission, enduring the pain so he could maintain control of his aircraft. It was a dangerous compromise, but it allowed him to stay in the air, where he believed he belonged. By the time the Battle of Britain raged across the skies, Johnson had earned his wings and joined a fighter squadron. The air war was relentless. Young pilots were thrown into combat with little experience, facing enemy veterans who had already mastered the art of aerial killing. Many did not survive their first encounters. Johnson, however, approached combat with a quiet focus that set him apart. He studied enemy movements, learned from every engagement, and refused to panic when bullets tore through the air around him. His first victory came not from reckless bravery, but from patience, waiting for the right moment. He lined up his opponent and struck with precision. That single success changed everything. It proved not only that he could survive, but that he could dominate. In a sky filled with chaos and fear, Johnnie Johnson had taken his first step toward becoming one of the most formidable pilots of the war. As Johnson gained experience, he was placed under the command of Douglas Bader, one of the most famous and controversial leaders in the Royal Air Force. Bader was aggressive, demanding, and uncompromising, but he believed in a simple idea: survival depended on teamwork and boldness, not individual heroics. Under Bader's leadership, fighter squadrons were sent deep into enemy airspace, where mistakes were fatal and hesitation meant death. For Johnson, this was a harsh but invaluable education. Every mission sharpened his instincts, forcing him to make decisions in seconds while surrounded by danger. Johnson quickly adapted to this brutal rhythm. He learned how to read the sky, how to spot enemy aircraft before they saw him, and how to position himself for the kill. Rather than chasing glory, he focused on discipline, staying close to his wingmen and striking only when the odds were in his favor. This approach allowed him to survive where others fell. One by one, enemy fighters were destroyed, and his reputation began to grow within the squadron. But war does not reward success with safety. In August 1941, Bader himself was shot down and captured by the Germans. His loss shook the entire wing, removing not just a commander but a symbol of confidence and defiance. In the chaos that followed, Johnson was forced to step forward. He was promoted and given greater responsibility, now tasked not only with his own survival but with the lives of the pilots who flew beside him. At the same time, the Luftwaffe introduced a terrifying new weapon, the Focke-Wulf FW-190. Faster, stronger, and more heavily armed than the British Spitfire, it quickly dominated the skies. Allied losses mounted as pilots struggled to match it. Johnson, however, refused to accept defeat. Through careful tactics and relentless practice, he learned how to counter the German fighter, using timing and positioning to overcome raw power. Each encounter became a deadly test, and with every victory, Johnson moved closer to becoming one of the RAF's most feared opponents. By 1942, Johnnie Johnson was no longer just another fighter pilot. He had become a leader whose presence changed the balance of every mission. Now commanding his own squadron, he carried the weight of responsibility as heavily as the enemy's fire. Each flight over occupied Europe was a calculated risk, where a single mistake could cost multiple lives. Johnson was known for his calm under pressure. While others were consumed by fear or anger, he flew with controlled intensity, guiding his men through hostile skies with steady, deliberate movements. One of the most dangerous moments of his career came during the Dieppe raid. When Allied forces launched a desperate assault on the French coast, the skies above the beaches turned into a deadly storm of aircraft. With German fighters attacking in overwhelming numbers, tracer fire lit the air, and pilots on both sides fell from the sky. Johnson led his squadron through the chaos, engaging enemy planes while protecting vulnerable Allied bombers. He shot down several opponents during the battle, but more importantly, he brought most of his men home alive. The lessons of Dieppe reshaped Johnson's approach to warfare. He understood that victory was not measured only by how many enemies were destroyed, but by how many allies survived. This philosophy made him a respected commander. Pilots trusted him because he never asked them to take risks he would not take himself. He also recognized the limits of the equipment he was given. The Spitfire, though elegant, struggled against the newer German fighters. Johnson pushed for improvements, knowing that technology could mean the difference between life and death. When the upgraded Spitfire X finally arrived, it transformed the battlefield. For the first time in months, British pilots could meet the FW-190 on equal terms. Johnson used this advantage ruthlessly. His victories increased rapidly, and his name spread through both Allied and German forces. To the Luftwaffe, he became a silent hunter, striking without warning and disappearing before they could react. In the skies over Europe, Johnnie Johnson had become a legend in motion. As the war moved toward its final and most decisive stage, Johnson was given command of a powerful wing of fighter squadrons. By now, he was no longer simply a skilled pilot. He was a strategist responsible for controlling entire sections of the sky. His task was clear but brutally difficult: ensure that Allied bombers and invasion forces could operate without being torn apart by German fighters. The coming invasion of Western Europe depended on air superiority, and failure was not an option. During the weeks leading up to D-Day, Johnson's pilots flew relentless patrols, sweeping enemy aircraft from the air and striking targets across occupied territory. The intensity of the fighting was unlike anything before. German pilots fought desperately, knowing that defeat in the sky would mean defeat on the ground. Johnson led from the front, often placing himself in the most dangerous positions so that his men could operate with greater freedom. In doing so, he continued to add to his growing list of victories, even as exhaustion and stress took their toll. When Allied forces finally landed in Normandy, the skies above the beaches were filled with aircraft from every direction. Johnson's wing worked tirelessly, intercepting enemy fighters and attacking supply lines that could threaten the troops below. On more than one occasion, he found himself separated from his formation, surrounded by hostile aircraft, yet he escaped through instinct and experience. These moments revealed the true depth of his skill, not just as a fighter, but as a survivor. By the end of the campaign, Johnson had become the highest-scoring Allied ace against the Luftwaffe, yet he showed little interest in personal fame. His focus remained on protecting his pilots and completing the mission. In the chaos of war, where so many sought glory, Johnnie Johnson chose responsibility, and in doing so, he secured his place among the greatest airmen in history. When the guns finally fell silent and the skies of Europe returned to peace, Johnnie Johnson did not celebrate as a conqueror. Like many who had survived the war, he carried with him the invisible weight of every mission flown and every life lost. His record of victories placed him among the greatest fighter pilots in history. Yet he never viewed those numbers as trophies. To him, each victory was simply another moment he had managed to keep his squadron alive in a world designed to destroy them. After the war, Johnson continued to serve in the Royal Air Force, rising through the ranks and shaping the future of British aviation. But it was not his position or his medals that defined him, it was his understanding of what air combat truly meant. He knew that behind every aircraft was a human being, driven by fear, duty, and hope. This awareness made him a leader who valued discipline over recklessness and responsibility over fame. In later years, Johnson became a storyteller of his own experiences, recording the brutal honesty of wartime flying for generations who would never hear the roar of engines over a burning sky. His words offered more than history, they revealed the cost of victory and the fragile line between life and death that every pilot had walked. Johnnie Johnson's legacy is not just written in the number of aircraft he destroyed, but in the example he set. He proved that true mastery in war is not about domination, but about control over fear, over chaos, and over one's own desire for glory. In the darkest hours of the 20th century, he remained steady, precise, and human. Long after the last Spitfire was grounded, his story continued to fly, reminding the world that even in the most violent of skies, courage and integrity can still leave a lasting mark.